You as a person recognizing what is important to me. What do I envision this experience looking like for me? What are my priorities? Is it my children, my partner, then myself? Um, that's not gonna work.
You got to flip that one. If
Right.
you are if you are a regular listener, you know that that is the complete opposite order of what I preach.
That's not going to work. I tell my moms, I tell my couples, you are at the foundation of everything that's going to flow out of you. So if you want your marriage to improve, you got to focus on you first. If you want your relationship with your kids to improve, if you want the way you show up with your kids to look different, if you want to be less short, if you want to be less irritated, you have to start with you first.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how much parenthood could change a marriage. If flirting, laughing, and having fun together feels like a thing of the past, then I'm here to teach you that marriage doesn't have to feel so hard with your parents, and your marriage can thrive even when you're in the season of raising kids. Whether you're in a good place in your marriage and you just want to continue growing together, or you're wondering if you even like your spouse anymore, this podcast has something for you. Join me here each week as we dive into what it takes to help your marriage grow, and maybe even do a 180. You'll learn ways to handle conflict better, bring that spark back into your relationship, as well as learn how to improve other areas of your life from my lovely guest experts. Are you ready for the next stage of your life and marriage? Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood podcast. I am so excited to introduce my guest this week, Hazel Walker. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. And honestly, when I first started talking to her, I think we met on Threads, was it?
It might have been.
I was like, I love her. I need to be her friend. And so we set up a call to meet each other. And I was like, okay, I definitely still like her. And we need to have her on the podcast because she also works with moms. She also works with couples. And during our talk, a really big topic that is going to be super helpful to many of you came up, which is how motherhood changes our marriage. And sometimes, or I would say oftentimes, in negative ways. And at least for my couples that I work with and the moms I work with, sometimes they don't get out of it. They don't know how to get out of it. It just keeps coming up and they feel stuck. And it seems like their marriage is falling apart more and more as the kids get older, rather than what they thought would happen is once the kids get older, things would get easier. So we're going to talk about how having kids affects our marriage and what we can do to set our marriage up for success without involving our partners, okay? Because I know it's easy to be like, we're going to go to therapy, or we're going to go to counseling, or we're going to work with a marriage coach, and you kind of just drag your partner, but there might be something you could do before that, okay? So, hello, Hazel. Thanks for being on the show. Can you please introduce yourself to the listeners? Tell us where you live, how old your kids are, and what made you decide to A, become a therapist, and B, work with moms and
Yeah.
couples.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. So as Michelle shared, my name is Hazel. I am originally from Brooklyn, New York, but I currently live in Alabama. I know it's quite the drastic change culturally, but I actually went to college down here. So it wasn't that much of a stretch when we were like, hey, let's move back to some place familiar. I am a mom of 3. I have a 8-year-old, a 4 turning 5-year-old soon, and a 2 turning 3-year-old. And what got me into working with this population, with moms and new parent couples, is just my own experience. When I became a mom for the first time 8 years ago, I felt things that I didn't realize I could feel. As a clinician, this wasn't an area in our field that we talked about in our graduate school training. We didn't talk about the life transition of becoming parents. We talked about developmental stages of children and, what they do and what's to be expected. We talked about like mental illness, but we didn't really talk about this one really, really major transition, and that's becoming a parent. And at that time, I was super emotional. I think I had undiagnosed postpartum depression. I was very emotional, cried every day. I put a lot of pressure on myself. One of the expectations that I had was that I was going to breastfeed my son for a year. because that's what I heard my mom say that she did. And I equated that to being a great mom because I think my mom's an amazing mom. And I was like, oh, in order to be a great mom, I have to breastfeed my child until a year. And then when that didn't happen, because I didn't realize that when you combine exhaustion because you're not getting any sleep with just trying to keep yourself alive and a tiny human alive, I didn't realize the level of work and intentionality that it takes to breastfeed. And then when trying to like throwing pumping in there, I was like, this is too much. And there were some days where it was like, do I shower, do I eat, or do I pump? And or do I go to sleep? And I was like, I can't keep doing this. There was a lot of pressure that I felt like whenever we would go to the pediatrician, oh, are they gaining weight? There was a lot of focus around that. I produce small babies. I think that's something that I learned. But I don't think the doctors are, I don't want to say they don't care, um, but I don't think they recognize the impact that it has on a new mom's mental health when there is a hyper fixation on is the baby growing, especially if that mom is breastfeeding. There's definitely a connection between, well, my body isn't good enough. I'm not doing good enough. I can't do enough to like take care of my baby. So yeah, there was a lot of struggle, a lot of pressure, and I was like, something needs to be done to offer moms better access to mental health support to talk about the changes that you go through. Whether you're diagnosed with a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, or you're just like, I don't meet the criteria for that, but I'm just struggling because this is just such a big change. Um, I was frustrated that I couldn't find someone to talk to, even as a clinician who was resourceful. Um, so the seed was planted of I want to do something different. I started looking for jobs, couldn't really find any that was looking for someone like me, like a licensed marriage and family therapist. A lot of the jobs that I saw were either one an hour away or they were only for social workers. So I had some frustration coupled with my own experience. But I kind of put it to the side. I was like, hey, I just got to do what I got to do to make money, take care of our newborn child. Daycare is not cheap. So I sat on the idea, and then the pandemic hit. I had my second. And then that was when I was like, all right, Hazel, now's the time to do something. You got to figure out how to support families. I mean, new moms and new parent couples. It started off with working with moms, but as I was working with them, I think because I'm a marriage and family therapist and people see that I started getting a lot of couples. Some were new parents, but then others were like parents who had children between the ages of like newborn to 5, 6. And I started noticing a common theme of a lot of the issues that they were dealing with in the present were connected to unresolved issues or unresolved wounds from the family planning stage, from the pregnancy, from the birthing experience, from the postpartum experience. So that's what kind of led me into creating my coaching program that I have now, where I really work with moms to help them to identify ways to regain control of their story and the experience that they have as moms. And I really want moms to get to a place where they are not allowing the overwhelm to dictate how they show up as a mom in their marriage, but getting them to a place where they can start to own their experience. And a part of that is recognizing some really important things that I'm sure we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, no, I mean, I resonate with so much of what you shared. I actually think that I also went through undiagnosed postpartum depression with my daughter. I had no idea until I snapped out of it. And I was like, it was almost like a fog lifted. And I just had no idea I was in the fog because it became my normal
Mm-hmm.
so much that I actually went up to my husband. I was like, I don't know if this is going to sound weird because I have like depression that runs in my family, so I know what that looks like. And I'm like, but I wonder if I had postpartum depression. And my husband's like, you definitely did. Like I asked you before. I was like, I don't even remember you asking me. Like that's how much of a fog I felt like I was in. And because I wasn't like crying every day or struggling to get out of bed to do things, I thought, oh, I don't have depression. I don't have suicidal ideations. Like, all the clinical depression symptoms, I didn't have those, but I lacked motivation. I just felt kind of like in a state of gray all the time, right? I wasn't like sad, but I wasn't happy. Like, I felt like my emotions were muted,
Mhm.
And so now that I'm out of it, I'm like, whoa, like that was wild. And so many people experience varying levels of that in
Mhm.
combination with also postpartum anxiety and just all kinds of things that come up. And it really is such a shame that it's kind of like this rite of passage that we are not well equipped to handle, right? Everybody focuses on, oh, okay, you're pregnant. Oh my gosh, congratulations. You look beautiful. I'm so excited for you. And you have a million appointments to check on the baby. But then once that baby comes out, they're like, oh,
See
6 weeks, 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Check off this questionnaire. Good to go. But we are not properly prepared for the impact that we experience as a person, as a mother, as a spouse, right?
Mhm.
And so I want to dive into that. And so let's talk about, what are the different things that you normally see show up as people become parents, right?
Mhm.
And I will admit that I feel like moms experience the most change because, hello, like we just birthed the baby. Hormonally, we are changing a lot. Also, societally, we have a lot of responsibilities put on our shoulders. And yes, the husbands do experience change too, obviously. But I want to say that we experience a lot more internally than they do. And so I'm kind of like leading us a certain way, listeners, if you're not kind of picking up what I'm putting down. But there's a lot of stuff that we ourselves walk into and pick up, but we don't know that we can actually put them down and not bring them into our journey of motherhood. So let's dive into what are the ways that becoming a mom affects marriage.
Before I answer that, there was something that you said, and I was like, "Yep." When you talked about like filling out that questionnaire when you go
Mm-hmm.
to those the 6 week or the 8 week
Pitiful.
appointment, yeah, it's horrible because the reality is, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I lied all 3 times I took the test because of like fear of judgment, especially being a person of color. Like,
Yep.
what might they think of me, or what might they do if I'm honest and saying, "Yeah, I'm really struggling." And like to go into the question that you asked now, how does that show up for us, and how do we bring that into the relationship? If I don't feel like I'm safe enough to be able to say, you know what, I am really struggling, or I don't even know what this is, but I need some help. Do we feel safe enough to go to our partner and say, like, hey, I'm struggling, I need that help? And sometimes that uneven distribution of labor can be set up in the very beginning, right? Not only are you struggling, you're not asking for help, or you don't know how to ask for the help, but then you have a partner, because living in the United States, we don't get very good benefits. I mean, they suck. One partner has to go back to work. So you have a mom who is already struggling, who is unsure about how to ask for help. Now she has all of the responsibility of not only trying to figure out how to keep herself alive, how to find some type of motivation to make herself at least presentable so that she can take care of her infant who needs all of her support. And then you also are trying to manage and take care of the household. And then you don't have any time for yourself. You carry this now into when mom goes back to work, because again, benefits suck. So if you're lucky, you get to stay off for the 12 weeks, and I say lucky with a bit of frustration there. But if you're lucky, you get to stay for the 12 weeks. You might work a job where they pay you for that full amount of time, but then you go back to work and you're still carrying this load. So not only have you carried this load for 3 months, you go back to work, you have additional pressures, you have additional stress that you're holding on to, but we still haven't resolved that this uneven distribution of labor has been set up from the very beginning. And you try to manage it while already struggling yourself. You probably didn't have the time, couldn't make the time to address what was going on for you mentally and emotionally. So now how this shows up in the relationship is 5 months, a year down the road, everything comes to a head because you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed, you're carrying too much, you haven't asked for help. This has become the norm. And now you all are having arguments over the dishes in the sink. But the reality, it's not about the dishes in the sink. It's about the frustration. It's about the resentment. It's about the overwhelm. It's about all of these emotions that are underneath the surface that you all have not talked about for the past 6 months, for the past year, for the past 5 years, depending on how old your child is. And we have these moments where things happen in the relationship that trigger these feelings. It remains surface. It remains about the dishes. It remains about the cleaning of the house because you haven't figured out how to go deeper. You might not even be aware that the resentment is there. And that's why there's frustration and there's annoyance with your partner. So then clients show up into my office 3, 4, 5 years into parenthood, and they're like, our communication sucks, intimacy sucks. Help us figure that out. But then we have to go back and unpack. We have to
Yep.
talk about the family planning experience. We have to talk about the birthing experience. What happened in postpartum? How did both of you adjust to that? What did that look like? What came up? And then expectations is another big one. Like, what expectations did you feel like you had about what it meant to be a good mom? What expectations did you have for your partner? And where did both of you fall short? And how has that contributed to the resentment, the anger, the frustration, the overwhelm that's present for you all? That was a long-winded answer, but I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. And I mean, that's exactly it. There's so much that we experience as moms. Like, overwhelm is probably the theme of motherhood when you're first put into that transition. And it's sad, it's understandable. And I feel like we as women, just the history of being a woman in general, right? Rights were just barely given to us during our parents' generation. And we feel like we have to shoulder it all and not appear weak, right? We have to be like, no, I got this. I got this. I'm independent, da da da. But we have become and taken on that label of independent woman so much that it is to a fault, because being independent doesn't mean you don't need anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
It means you're capable of doing things. But how good are we as women, as mothers, as partners, when we are in a continuous state of burnout, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are a lot of things to do. Yes, traditionally women have done all of those things. But you know what? Women also weren't having to choose between work and being a good mom,
Right.
or having a good marriage and being a good mom, right? If we look back, we had a village as women, right? Like, there were just so many people around us ready to take the baby, ready to do things. You don't even have to ask, you just know, right? They
Mm-hmm.
just know it takes a village. Like, that phrase exists for a reason. And now in modern day parenting, we're very much siloed off. Maybe you're one of those people who are super, super lucky and you have active parents that love to be around your kids and just, you know, are great to be around. They listen to you for boundaries and they respect your parenting style, and not like, there's a lot of variables here. But there are people who don't have that, right? Like, I myself just moved from California to Georgia. I literally have no family but me and my husband,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I know I'm not the exception here. There are military families. There are families who are like, we don't talk to our family for a good reason, right?
Yeah.
And we're out here doing it on our own, thinking, oh, I still have to do it myself. But it's like, well, do you though? Right. And so, to your point, Hazel, couples coming years down the line. I even had a couple come to me with teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're like, same thing. She said, we have a communication problem. He's like, no, she does too much. And so they can't even get on the same page about what the issue is. And I understand why we are in this position. I've done this myself. I'm saying this out of so much love and so much desire for your own growth and like best life possible. Okay. But us women need to take more ownership of what we're picking up and what we're not choosing to put down. Okay, so let's kind of dive into that. So, there are ways that we can set our marriage up for success without involving our partner at all. Will you eventually? Absolutely, right? You can't work on communication just by yourself. You can improve how you communicate, but communication involves like more than one person, right? You're not just talking to
Mhm.
yourself. So, before we even involve the partner, both Hazel and I have same approaches when we work with couples. We always go back to the individual.
Mhm.
So let's talk about that. What are some things that you have seen and helped couples through when it comes to rewinding and being like, okay, hold on. So before we get into the communication part,
Yeah.
right? What are some things that you've noticed where you're like, okay, I see it now? I
Mhm.
see how you each have made choices that have led you to create this dynamic that you seem like you're in a continuous loop and you can't get out of. But you didn't know that you made that choice and it just kept going and going and going.
Yeah. Um, a couple of things come to mind. The first I talk about is expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I've had so many conversations with couples that I work with, whether I'm seeing the dyad or I'm just seeing the mom. I've had so many conversations around expectations. So I give an example of if there's the expectation that I need the house clean. The house being clean is something that's really important to me. That could be based on prior experience. That could be culturally based of like, this is what I saw growing up. This is what helps me to feel organized. Whatever the reasoning is, here's an expectation, right? Your partner could hear that, but their understanding of that expectation is going to look different. It's going to be based on their own experiences, their own ideas of what a clean house looks like. So for them, a clean house might be I'm going to take all of the dishes off the table, all of them off the counter, put them in the sink. To them, it's clean. For you, it's I need the dishes out of the sink. I need the counters wiped. I need the floor swept. I need it mopped. I need the dishes in the dishwasher and I need the dishwasher started. But they don't know that because you haven't communicated that to them. Right. And I'll come in a minute to those who are like, but I have. We've had this conversation over and over again, but they're still not doing it. Right. So then a part of that is, well, what's getting in the way of the message being received? Something that I work with my couples on is helping them to understand the difference between content and context in their communication. And a part of understanding the context is recognizing, well, how am I presenting myself in these conversations that makes it difficult for my partner to receive what it is that I'm saying? Am I being judgmental? Am I putting them down? Am I belittling them? Am I ignoring the efforts that they're making? Because one thing I've noticed is that nobody wants to work on a team where they feel like they're not good enough or they're constantly being criticized. That is the quickest way for someone to be like, I'm out, tag someone
You
else
do
in.
it then.
Right, right.
Yep. Yep.
And when they do make the attempts to do it, right, like you're critical. You pick apart everything that they do, right? Like that's going to deflate them. And they're not going to feel confident in being willing to say like this is my partner, we are a team, we'll identify the problem and tackle it together. So that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect is like you as a person recognizing what is important to me. Like what do I envision this experience looking like for me? What are my priorities? Is it my children, my partner, then myself? Um, that's not gonna work.
You got to flip that one. If
Right.
you are if you are a regular listener, you know that that is the complete opposite order of what I preach.
Right? That's not gonna work. I tell my moms, I tell my couples, like you are at the foundation of everything that's gonna flow out of you. So if you want your marriage to improve, you gotta focus on you first. If you want your relationship with your kids to improve, if you want the way you show up with your kids to look different, if you want to be less short, if you want to be less irritated, you have to start with you first. Starting with you first looks like making your to-do list every day, right? Because self-care isn't just about I'm going to the spa, I'm going to get my nails done, I'm going on a trip. First of all, everybody doesn't have money for that. Second of all, the way this economy is going, everybody's not going to have money for that. But self-care is really about how can I slow down enough to listen to what my body is trying to tell me so that I can give it what it needs. For some of us, yeah, self care might be doing those things. It might be going to get your nails done. It might be going to get a massage because you're carrying the tension in your body. I'm not knocking that because I love a good massage and I also like to get my toes and my nails done. But self care also captures what are things that I can do to help myself mentally? What are things that I can do to take care of my mental and my emotional? So for me, I've realized that when I have a lot of thoughts circulating around in my brain, it makes it really hard for me to feel organized. And it's a lot easier for the overwhelm to slip in and take over when I don't have a plan. So for me, I've realized that a part of my self-care routine is, or my self-care plan is having a routine. Is starting every morning with my devotion. Is starting every morning with prayer. Is starting every morning with making my to-do list and outlining what are my top 3 priorities for the day. And I'm one of those priorities. So if it's Hazel, you're going to bed early tonight. Hazel, you are going for a walk. Whatever that priority is or whatever that thing is, I'm making sure that I'm one of the 3 priorities. But I make that list. My list could have 15 things, but I know that realistically, I cannot do all 15 things in one day. So I make that list, I make my priority. When I identify what those things are, another thing that I like to do with my couples is I have them ask the question, what's mine, what's theirs, what's ours? So are there things on this list that I can release to my partner? Because the not overwhelmed version of myself knows that they're fully capable. They know how to do these things. They're an adult. We've had a conversation already about what our shared expectations are around these things. So, how can I say, hey, here are all the things I have on my plate. Here are all the things that need to get done as it relates to our household. I can't handle that. Can I give this to you? And when we give things to our partner, we have to give it and release it. We can't give it and still maintain control. We can't give it and still be hovering over them or being super critical of the way they do it, right? If our shared expectation is this is what we're looking for, your process might be different, but you have to trust that the end result is going to be the same, even though you might go about it in different ways. So, one, it's like really recognizing that your expectations are going to influence how you show up in your relationship, but you also have to be aware of what those expectations are so that you can clearly communicate them to your partner. But then the other part of it is recognizing like what is it that I want for myself and how do I communicate this to my partner? How do I share it with them? How do I let them know I have too much going on, I need to release? Right? How can you get back to prioritizing yourself, putting yourself on the list, making sure that you're first? My hierarchy is you come first, your partner comes second, the kids come third, and then anything else after that. Maybe your job, maybe your extended family, but you have to prioritize you. And if you are in a partnership, what comes next is your marriage because if that is falling apart, it's going to trickle down into how you co-parent together. This is the example that you're going to be setting for your kids. So they need to see that mommy and daddy come before us. They need to have that understanding of they love each other enough. They are committed to each other enough. So we're safe. We're secure. We know that we're good. And it's okay for them to be like, no, this is mommy daddy time. Or don't come in our room before 8 o'clock.
I love that. There were a couple things that you shared where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good and so necessary for all my listeners to hear. Like, number one, you need to factor yourself into your day. This is not a let me see what all needs to be done and then whatever is left, then maybe I can put myself in there. No, 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 no. You get to be number one. Okay, because I know firsthand the difference between me going on a walk and exercising and moving in my body and me not going on an exercise and me not moving my body. Okay, I am a complete bitch when I don't move my body. Okay, I will call myself out. All right, like today it was kind of raining and I was like, dang it, I can't go on a walk. But you know what? I was like, no, I'm not letting that, set my day up for potential failure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do Pilates at home. And
But
so
you
I did.
see, that's the thing. You know that about yourself. You
Yes.
recognize that about yourself. And I think the struggle with a lot of moms that I've worked with is that they have lost themselves so much in motherhood that they can't even say that. They can't even recognize, like, yes, I would really love to go for a walk, but here's this other thing in my toolkit
Mm-hmm.
that I could tap into so that I can still prioritize myself, so that I can still make sure that, like, I am, what's the word I'm looking for? Regulated.
Yes. And I wasn't like this before. I just started kind of putting two and two together. So if you don't know that about yourself, I urge you to kind of journal. Like, hey, when I have a bad day, what all happened or didn't
Mhm.
happen? Oh, when I have a good day, what all happened? And kind of just like see the patterns. What contributes to you having a good day and you not having a good day? Because to me, I do not want my lack of preparation and prioritization of myself mean that I'm going to yell at my kids, be more impatient with them, not have fun with them, and be snippy. Like I don't think it's worth it. And I don't think that it's fair to them. And that's not who I want to be.
Mhm.
You get to be a priority to yourself. This is not optional, this is mandatory. Okay.
Yeah.
I never say should, but this is something I'm going to say should. You need to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
The second one is about the division of labor at home. Okay. This is a huge one. A lot of you will be like, well, there's just so much to do. And you will assume that you own a particular task because you've been the one to do it for so long. Okay. So if you follow Hazel's exercise, what's mine, what's yours, what's ours? Okay. I want you to be fully honest with yourself. What can both of us do? Whether it's, oh, he has to learn, he can still do it, right? He's an adult. He didn't marry some incapable person, I hope. Okay. And what is something that only I can do? And I want you to not be so hard on yourself and be like, oh, I do it best, so only I can do it. I want you to pick and choose your battles, okay? You might be the best at doing it your way, but I want you to think about the overall outcome that is necessary for it to be marked complete, okay? Because sometimes when you're parents of littles, especially, or actually even teenagers, because sometimes I feel like teenagers are messier, okay? Speaking from experience, sometimes we have to lower our standard of living. Okay? Because it's not just you taking care of your stuff. It's like, oh, I put away my stuff. I clean up after myself.
Mhm.
No, there are a million other people who are also in the house doing whatever they feel like doing or forgetting or whatever. And so sometimes we kind of just have to chill out a little bit and accept our season of life and have that conversation with our spouse about, okay, in this season of, for me personally, we've got, let's see, Mondays, we've got basketball practice. Tuesday, we have dance practice and swim lessons. Wednesdays, basketball. Friday, basketball game, swim meet. Okay, so Thursday's pretty much our only free weeknight as a family where we're not like, okay, we gotta like be super good at following the schedule and da 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 da. And so we've had to just like accept that, okay, our house is gonna look like it's a little disheveled sometimes because what's the alternative, right? To us, it's a priority to keep the kids engaged in something to develop themselves socially as well as physically, mentally, all that stuff.
Mhm.
And so you need to be aware of what your limits are, right? And Hazel, you're the therapist. I'll let you speak to this. But sometimes how we were raised, our limits, what we think is baseline, is actually unhealthy,
Mhm.
where we need to seek out help because it causes us anxiety when we see even one thing out of place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this idea too, like kind of like what you're hitting on about like the nature of the home and the way my children look are a reflection of me as the
Oh,
mom,
yes. That's a
because
big
there's
one.
so much pressure that's put on. There's so much that's put on our shoulders around who you are as a mom. The family is a representation of you. Even when you go out in public, it could be like the entire family there. You, your spouse, the kids, but it's still like everyone's going to look to you. How are the kids behaving? They're going to look to mom. So I think that there's that piece of the narrative, and you have to examine and be like, all right, where did this expectation come from? Is this an expectation that still serves me? Okay, cool. How can I tweak it maybe to make it work for me in the season of life that I'm in? Like, I feel like my mom and her experience is one that has definitely influenced some of the expectations that I had for myself as a new mom. But my mom also only had one. I have three. So
Different.
it's a completely different experience and ball game. Um, they also had somewhat of a community. So like for myself and my husband, we had to create that community because we were away from family. At one point, we were like 3.5 hours from my side, and then we were like an airplane ride away from his side. So there was a lot that we had to figure out on our own. We had to do a lot of talking and communication around, like, here is my expectation. A lot of that was influenced by my family of origin and the household that I grew up in. But we had to have a lot of conversations about that. And I had to get to a point of like, does this expectation still work for me? And if it doesn't, okay, how can I tweak it? How can this look different? So maybe there are certain days where we clean the house, or there are certain rooms that the kids are just absolutely not allowed to eat in. And we might have to say it 50 times, but in order to like maintain our sanity and at least hold on to some shred of this expectation that we have of what a clean house looks like, these are the things that we have to do so that we then don't start turning against each other and seeing each other as enemies, because this goal isn't being accomplished or this expectation isn't being held onto.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, our family of origin, how we were raised, plays such a big role in how we show up as parents and as partners. Like, I know for me, it's timeliness. When we are running late to somewhere, I feel immense pressure
Mm.
and I start like panicking, like I get anxiety, right? I'm like, oh my God, like, and then I start yelling. I'm like, "Ugh," like I am just like really snippy and I'm criticized, like, what are you doing? It's not fun. And I'm still working on it. I'm way better than before. And when I look back, I'm like, oh, makes total sense. The way I grew up, my mom was like, if you're on time, you're late,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And that's how she was when we were running behind. She was like a drill sergeant, like, pick that up. Da, 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 da. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's where it comes from. And so now I know, like, if I feel that way because I feel like we're going to be late and I'm going to get upset, I need to prepare more ahead of time, give us more buffer time so that the kids can be kids, because I don't want them to ever feel like they can't be kids,
Yeah.
right? Because that's kind of how I felt like sometimes growing up. And I didn't know that. That was just my norm, right? And I want them to not feel like they have to be in this continuous state of anxiety because, oh my gosh, mom is like going nuts right now. And I don't want to get yelled at or I don't want to get things taken away. But really, I wasn't being fair to them with what was a reasonable amount of time to get them ready, right? Because kids are going to be like, no, I want to do this instead and run away from you. Or like, I don't want to wear that dress. Or, I have a 4-year-old. So like that's a
Yeah.
norm here, right? So it's like, okay, I did not give us enough time to get us ready.
Mhm.
Or, okay, I don't know if you watch Bluey, like if your kids watch Bluey, like do a tactical wee, I don't want to, I don't have to go. It's like, no, but I need you to do it
Yeah.
because, and so I urge you, okay, if you notice that you are continuously running into this like momster version of yourself,
Mhm.
question why.
Yeah.
What happened before I made that switch from like Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, right? Like, because that is literally how it feels. It's like, I'm good, I'm good. And then you have that moment of panic for me when I realize, oh shit, we're going to be late.
Mhm.
And now we have to rush. I don't like rushing. Then I switch and then I'm like on everybody's ass to get in the car, right? So it's like, okay, this happens every time.
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to be late. So
Mhm.
we need to give ourselves way more time. So if you're encountering this version of yourself, ask yourself what happened right before.
Yeah.
And just like take a note of it. Put it put it down in a journal or a post-it note, and then see when it happens again, and start taking these notes and notice this about yourself, because the more we are aware of ourselves, the more we can set ourselves up for success. And this goes back to that overwhelm piece of motherhood, right?
Mhm.
The more aware we are of ourselves, the more we can communicate with our partners. Hey, you know what I learned about myself? I turn in this like nasty version of myself whenever this triggers me. And
Mhm.
so, what can we do to support this pattern that I've developed? Oh, and it's not about like, we're late because you were in the bathroom for half an hour, or you decided to mow the lawn, or, whatever, right? I'm like totally generalizing here, but I'm sure a lot of people can relate, right? But like, instead of pointing the finger, what if you went to your partner with a lens of, here's the problem,
Yes.
here's us as partners, let's take on this problem together?
Yes.
Because he's going to be more willing to give you some suggestions or even reflect on what he could have done differently and own his part, instead of you being like, pointing the finger, blaming him for the choices that he made, and him being like, what the hell? you know
Mhm.
if you wanted to be on time, you could have da, 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 da. And so then it becomes like this battle of who's more wrong.
Yes. I love that you brought that up because that is the theoretical framework that guides the work that I do with clients, that is interwoven into my coaching program, is called narrative therapy. And a part of narrative therapy is one of the major things we do is we help clients be able to one, identify the problem, and then be able to externalize it so that you can then work together to fight against that problem. So, like your example that you gave of feeling like I'm going to be late, what does that bring up for you? It brings up this feeling of angst. Okay, well, what happens when angst enters the chat? I like to treat the emotion or the feeling as like a extra character
A
in the
user.
story. Yes, yes. So we talk about it, we give it its own like character, its own persona, and we talk about it as if it's this thing that's outside of you. Even the same thing for like if someone's diagnosed with depression or anxiety, or one partner is diagnosed with ADHD. All right, what happens when ADHD shows up? Like, how does that get in the way? How does that cause you to interact with your partner? How does that cause you to feel about yourself? What assumptions do you make about your partner when anxiety is present, or whatever the thing might be?
It's like Inside Out. Like, if you haven't
Yes.
watched the movie, go watch the movie, because I really wish that came out when we were little, but
Yes.
whatever.
Yes, but it's like that. You have to identify what the problem is. And remember, one of the key components of narrative therapy, too, is that the person is not the problem is the problem.
Yep.
So oftentimes couples come in and like fix them. They're the problem. They're the one that's doing this. They're the issue. They need to work on their communication. But they're not, right? Because when we get below the surface, we realize it's the resentment, it's the anxiety, it's the depression, it's the frustration. That's the real problem. It's the unequal distribution of labor. Those are the problems. We've identified what those problems are. So, how can we now work together to fight against it so that it doesn't negatively impact our relationship? Because the reality is that these things aren't going to disappear. We can't make anxiety disappear forever. We can't make frustration disappear forever. But what we can do is recognize it's present. Here's the impact it has on us when it's present, and here is our game plan to address it whenever we see it like knocking on the door, trying to invite itself in.
Yeah, and that's truly the definition of like working with yourselves. That's why that awareness piece is so crucial, right?
Mhm.
Then you start to take things less personally, because you're like, oh, I am like this because of my upbringing. I'm not doing this because I want to be
Or
a
out of
bitch,
spite.
right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's not because I want to make life difficult for everybody. It
Mhm.
just is something that I have developed over time. And the more we know about it, the more we can kind of work around it. How can we settle that part of me? Like, or sometimes my husband will get anxious or overstimulated. And it's just like, oh, that's just a part of you. Okay, I know that whatever is about to happen next is not something I should take personally. And instead, I should ask, hey, can I support you right now? Or like, what can I do to help you feel more settled? Or, whatever. Same for our kids. I think the more we individualize our awareness and support and really notice that, hey, we as people are complicated. We're not just one thing, right? Like I am not my anxiety when I'm late. That is just a part of me that kind of just like loves to say hello anytime we're running late. And I can settle that, right? I can choose to remember, oh, their experience right now matters too. Do I want to? Oh, here's a prime example. Going to family photo shoots. I know a lot of people can relate to this, right?
Mm,
They are stressful. Let's not lie about that.
mhm.
Okay. We've got to figure out who is wearing what, all has to kind of like complement each other. Then the female, if they choose to do this, makeup, hair, accessories, shoes, okay? And then you're like, oh, we got to iron clothes. We've got to get all the kids in the car. We can't get them dressed too early so they don't like mess things up and get food on it or whatever.
Gotta get snacks.
Got to get snacks, right? Everybody has to go do a tactical wee, and you got to get in the car and drive to the photo shoot site, and then
Somebody has to pee.
look, and then somebody has to be right, and then look really happy and smile for like half an hour to an hour. It's a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, because I have that thing that comes up whenever we're running late, I would be so upset. And like the pictures were not conveying how we actually felt towards each other at the moment.
Yeah.
But I've learned, nope, we are going to plan nothing on family photo shoot days. And it's going to be closer to the afternoon and evening so that we can do something fun. And then we have so much time to get ready.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
and this is why it's so important to understand when you get overwhelmed. This is why it's so important to understand how to work with yourself, how to convey this piece of you to your partner and not be like, oh, this makes me a shitty mom. Like, no, I am not a shitty mom because I do that. That
Mm-hmm.
is just a product of my upbringing, and I'm going to work with it. I'm not going to let myself get there. And if I do, I'm going to remember, okay, I don't want to pass this on to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so, sure, maybe it is worth being late so that I am not yelling at them, feeling like they did something wrong when really I just didn't get started early enough. I didn't honor their need for space to do things, because who likes to be interrupted and be like, you got to do this right now. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care that you're enjoying yourself right now doing, I don't know, coloring or playing a video game or whatever. You're going to get up and go do what I need you to do. Like, nobody would enjoy that. I definitely would not enjoy being told what to do. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that is one of the many ways that you can set your marriage up for success without even involving your partner until like after you're ready to share. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so let's kind of do a quick recap here. What are the different ways that we have discussed throughout this episode that moms out there can be a little more cognizant about what they can do on their own to create more of a positive impact on their marriage so that motherhood doesn't eat them up alive and their marriage is basically sacrificed because of this lack of awareness of what they can do?
Yeah. You really have to spend some time getting to know you again. Like spend some time with you. Like
Mm-hmm.
so much about who you are as a person and so much of your identity has changed. Um a part of you has to mourn the old you that was free and could just plan something and go as you please, that committed more time to doing the things that you loved. And then when you became a mom, it feels like you lost yourself. And that's a common theme that I've heard from a lot of my clients that I've worked with. And I've even heard it from dads too, but more specifically from the moms, I've heard like, I don't even know what I like. I feel like motherhood has completely swallowed me up. And they have no idea like what activities they would want to get themselves back into when we start to talk about self-care. So I would say the number one thing is just being able to spend some time with you. But you can't spend time with you if you're holding and carrying all of the things and you're not slowing down enough to really commit to who am I in this phase? Who am I outside of motherhood? Who am I outside of wifehood? Who am I outside of all of these other titles that I hold on to? Who am I as Hazel? What are the things that I like? What do I enjoy? What are my goals? What are my aspirations? Once you're able to take that out of your head and make that tangible, and that's something I believe in wholeheartedly, that we have to untangle the spaghetti brain. I haven't used that phrase in a long time, but I would talk to my moms about that, about like, we have spaghetti brain. And oftentimes when we have a plate of spaghetti, one thing that we do to try to organize it to take a nice clean bite, we take that fork, we spin it around. That way it has more organization, and we can take a bite out of it. Taking things out of our head and writing it down is like an example of being able to use the fork, because when it circles around in our head, as women, I know some of you can relate to this, that everything connects. So we might be thinking about the house, but then we're thinking about what's going to happen next week, and we're thinking about a partner's trip, and we're thinking about what's happening at school, and on we go. And then in the midst of that chaos, we lose ourselves because we're thinking about so many other things. So the number one priority is spend time with you, get to know you again, slow down, learn about your body, learn about yourself emotionally, learn about yourself mentally. What are those triggers? For you, Michelle, you've realized that like time is a factor. For me, disorganization is it. Like, I hate seeing chaos. It sets me in this place of like, I feel out of control. I feel overstimulated. So when overstimulation enters the chat, it definitely it holds on to overwhelm's hand and brings it into the chat as well. So now I got overwhelm and overstimulation in my ear telling me all of these things that I know aren't true, but in the moment, because it feels so big, I believe it. But I had to take time to recognize that about myself. And when I'm in that space, I am short. I get easily annoyed. I don't want to talk to my partner. Please don't touch me when I am in this space. And by being able to recognize that, I was then able to say, all right, here are things that I have done in the past that I recognize are super helpful when I'm in this space. So sometimes it might be I go and I sit in the closet in the dark for 5 minutes, but I communicate that. I say to I don't just disappear and leave the kids to wander in the living room on their own while my partner has no idea where I am. I communicated to him and I'm like, hey, I'm having a really tough time. I'm feeling the overwhelm and the overstimulation is through the roof. I just need like 5 minutes to myself. Can you handle this? He says yes. I go up, do what I need to do for myself. And then I can re enter the space in a way that aligns with how I want to show up as a wife and as a mom. Where instead, if I decided to allow that idea of I need to push through, because if I don't, I'm a horrible mom, but now I'm snippy and now I'm like catching attitude and now I'm like raising my voice. And he's like, whoa, where is this coming from? It's because I didn't stop and I didn't slow down enough to recognize overstimulation and overwhelm are really big, and it's going to have an impact on how I respond right now. So the biggest thing is just like take some time, get to know you again, identify those triggers, identify ways to like address them and deal with them. What are things that you can do before we enter this phase of like, this is what I need my partner to do? Because that's usually how things start, right? Like, I've had moms come in hot, like they're the problem, address that. And it's really hard for them to hear, oh, well, you might be a part of the problem too, because you're keeping this dynamic going. It's really hard for them to hear that when they come in, like, no, they're the problem, fix them. And I'm not doing anything they want. I'm not having sex with them if they're like not helping me and not meeting my needs. But it's a lot deeper than just, I don't want to have sex with them. There are a lot of wounds and a lot of issues that are present beneath the surface that has to be resolved. But first, we got to start with you.
Yes, I always tell my couples, like, look, you might think the other person needs to be fixed for this marriage to change, but you guys co-created this problem. Like, this was not a one person thing.
Right.
Um, okay, so I love that exercise of becoming more aware. And one of the exercises that I love to do, if this feels like something that's more up your alley, because, you know, different tools for different people, is playing in the world of what if.
Mm.
What if motherhood felt more enjoyable to me? What if my marriage was something that I loved to be a part of again? What if I did want to have sex with my husband? What would need to happen for that to be reality for me? Right. And so just playing that like imaginary realm And you'll find that you'll get some answers that you haven't been wanting to admit to yourself. Like, oh, for me to want to have sex with him, I probably need to feel less stressed. I
Mhm.
would need more energy. I would need more sleep. I would need to have more time to myself. Like, so if Hazel's exercise isn't one that you feel like you could sit down and do, try that one, okay? It doesn't matter what you use. At the end, we just want you to have that level of awareness of yourself so that you can take action, so that
Mhm.
you can know what your next step is and feel more hope in your situation instead of feeling like, oh, this is just how it's going to be.
Yeah.
We're definitely doomed. Like, I'm either going to stay miserable in this marriage or we're going to get a divorce, right? It's not always that way. Sometimes it is, and
Mhm.
sometimes it is the better situation for your family, and sometimes it isn't. And you won't know until you take this first step of gaining that awareness so that you can support yourself through this potential massive overwhelm that is motherhood
Yeah.
and not letting it leak into your marriage.
And
Okay.
even if divorce is the route that you have both decided you have to take, you still have to identify and work through these
Yes.
dynamics, because whatever is showing up in the marriage that is unresolved, it is going to show up in your co-parenting experience as divorced individuals. So even doing this work from now is super important. Like, what are the wounds, what are the triggers that are present for you, and then how do I communicate that to my partner, to my co-parent? How do we have those conversations in a way that both of us can receive what's being said, kind of like what I talked about, content versus context? And then what are these cycles or these patterns of interaction that we find ourselves getting stuck in that we can't seem to figure out how to break? And I have some like worksheets in my workbook that helps you to kind of map that out and understand what that is.
Yeah. So either way, it's not a waste of time, even if it doesn't work out in your marriage. Like, this is going to set you up as co parents much better. Like, as a co parent, I will say that it is so important to have good communication and be on a relatively same page as your co parents, because you co parenting with someone who has literally no tie to you other than your kid is very different than co parenting with your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, ideally, obviously, you guys would stay together because that's a lot easier for everybody. But sometimes it's not going to work out. And either way, it's better for you to be more aware of your stuff
Mm-hmm.
so that you can be a better communicator. Okay. So, Hazel,
Yes.
let us know, where can people find you? Where's the best way they can connect with you and continue to learn from you?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram. I do post reels that provides practical tips on, like, one that I did recently was, if you're struggling with overwhelm, here's ways that you can communicate that with your partner. So I give examples of like what we might actually say that's not too helpful, and I give the alternative of what you can say to get that conversation going. So you can find me on Instagram at It's Apparently Time, and that's ITSAPARENTLYTIME. I know it's a mouthful, but it's apparently with one P. So it's apparently time. And then my website is www.itsapparentlytime.com. That's where you can go to find out more information about my group coaching program called Moms Owning Motherhood. And it's really about teaching married moms how to overcome the overwhelm so that they can show up better for themselves and within their relationships.
I love it. Thank you so much for being a guest on this show. I really loved getting to just like share what our unique experiences were as moms and also let you listeners know that you're not alone. Like, we too have experienced these things and there's a way out of this. There are things that can be done, people out here that can support you to work through the issues that you are facing today so that you can have a brighter future.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Hazel. I loved our conversation. And thank you all for making it all the way to the end of the episode. I hope that you're walking away with so many gems to apply to your life and to make motherhood less overwhelming and to make marriage more appealing again. If you love this episode, please let us know. Reach out and let us know what you loved most about it. And if you know someone that could benefit from hearing this episode, do her a solid and share it. And if you love the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and Spotify. I would so appreciate that, and let other people know that this show is one to be listened to. And I will catch you back here on the next episode. Bye, everyone. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please send me a message over on Instagram at Michelle Perta Coaching to let me know what you loved most about it. Hearing from my listeners is my absolute favorite. And if you've been loving this podcast, please leave a rating and review. This will help people like you find the show and get the help they need. Catch you here on the next episode. Bye.